Yeah, so it is an interesting debate who the best team in college football is. Like I think I want to say Ohio State is the best team, but then Indiana is like I guess the question I have is like, is this the year Indiana breaks through? Like it seems like Indiana, like not even just last year, but it seems like in the past Indiana's had some nice seasons where it's like, okay, Indiana, okay, they were pretty good this year, but they're still like, I forget what year it was there in the Big Ten championship game, but they lost. It's like, did they, or I don't know, they've, been years where they've been in contention. They've had some nice teams, but you've seen went, was it 30 years with losing 30 straight losses to Michigan, really struggled with Ohio State. And, so that's the thing. Like, Indiana, like, what do they have to do? Like even if they don't win the national championship, are they like if they win two playoff games, is that where people kind of really put their fist out and say, okay, Indiana like that's becoming an elite program. That's going to be a year in, year out national title contender. Like for example, like I root for the Lions, so like the Lions, it was same old Lions for a long time. Not that they say like same old Indiana, but it's like the Lions finally made it to the NFC Championship game in 23. Granted, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but it's like that was kind of like, okay, let's put to bed the same old Lions. The Lions are going to choke. The Lions, maybe they make the playoffs, but they'll be one and done. Like Indiana, do they, like if they win two playoff games, is that enough where, well, I would say, I'd also throw in there if Indiana wins the Big Ten championship game and then they win two playoff games, is that enough where you're saying, okay, Indiana is legit? Let's put to bed like Indiana is not a contender. Like Indiana under Kurt Singletti, their coach, Indiana like is going to be a consistent year in and year out playoff contender. So yeah, that's that's to me what's interesting. I think, yeah, I think the way the rankings are, the top three is about spot on. Texas Tech, you saw moved in the in number five. I think the top three are pretty set in stone at this point. I think most people would agree Texas A&M, Ohio State, Indiana are the three best teams in college football at this point. Um, Main question for Ohio State is can they beat Michigan this year? Could be a similar situation to last year as they could lose to Michigan, make a deep run in the playoff, even win the national championship. So, but yeah, that's such an interesting predicament with Ohio State. It's like, okay, well, we could we could lose to Michigan, make another deep playoff run, even then win the national title, but we're still in that same kind of predicament where it's like, okay, does this national championship have an asterisk? Is it still I guess a slight disappointment? So yeah, you could still be, for Ohio State, you could still be in that boat even with another successful season. Obviously, they have not played Michigan yet, but yeah, and that's interesting because you feel like Ohio State still, a scenario like that could play out because it's very well likely that Ohio State could lose to Michigan and still get in the playoffs. So, but yeah, obviously that game easier said than done for Michigan that they're going to win that game. Easy, but I get the same could be true for Ohio State. Easier said than done that they're going to beat Michigan. Got to come at Michigan. Michigan, it feels like they just kind of have that confidence against them. Texas A&M still have to play Texas. That's not going to be easy. Texas, I don't. I guess I haven't follow. I don't have the record in front of me between those two teams, but it feels like for a long time Texas has kind of had Texas A&M's number. And it's interesting. Texas A&M kind of reminds me of Indiana when you think about that's. Now that I think about it more, Texas A&M and in Indiana are kind of interesting because they're both similar in the sense that like they've had good seasons, but they've never really had the breakthrough season where it's like A&M, for example, under Johnny Manziel, 9-4, 11-2. A&M's kind of had those years where they've been very competitive. You thought maybe they were going to compete for a conference title, but you knew they were not really a legit national title until you for sure saw them win it. Like under Manziel, like the year they won 11-2, it's like they still lost to Florida and they lost. What was the other game in 20? I know that's going back a ways, 2013. LSU. So it's like you still lost to a couple good teams. It's like that's like Indiana or like A&M in A&M Indiana. It's like those two teams still kind of in that predicament of like they're still kind of in that, I guess, prove it phase, if you will, where it's like, okay, we think they could be, okay, it's a possibility they could break through and be a national title contender, but it's still a long stretch. We we think they could be a conference title contender, but that would be the first step. So A&M a&M, I guess I should clear. A&M obviously has been a stronger program historically, but they both are similar programs when you kind of break it down in that way, or break it down in that sense. Is their conference, they've been competitive at times, conference contenders at times, but still have not broken in to become a year in. They still have not won the national title in a long time, and they still have not really kind of broken that mold and, really stated that claim where they can really have shown that they can be a year in, year out national title contender. So, yeah, that's what's interesting. Miami, a good team too. It looks like with the playoff announced last night, they had Miami in the playoffs. Was it Tulane? They had Tulane and Notre Dame, the two at large. So yeah. Trying to throw. I still think Oklahoma could be Oklahoma. I think is a sneaky tough team, not just because they beat my Michigan Wolverines, but I don't know. Oklahoma they strike me as one of those teams. I really only watch them fully. I watched part of them against Texas, but really only watched them fully against Michigan, and then I saw the highlights of them against Bama. They strike me as a team. I got to give Brett Venables credit. He not that he's always done a nice job. But the under Oklahoma and even at Clemson, there's a little inconsistency. But I think he's a good coach overall. But to me, Brett Venables, I think the reason he's I think he's good for a couple of reasons. He shows a lot of different looks defensively. He likes to make adjustments. He likes to try new things. Does he have moments where he gets burnt? You go back 2011 against Oklahoma, against Baylor. I know that's going back a long time, but even at Clemson, they've had games where the defense a little disappointing. 2019 against LSU kind of got picked apart. I know that was Burrow, Chase, and company. But I guess the point I'm trying to make with Brett Venables is like in this year in particular with Oklahoma, that defense just like they're just very, I don't know, what's the best way to put it? They don't go away. Like I felt like in the Michigan game, it's like Michigan, I know their offense struggled kind of as a whole, but you saw like Haynes had that like 70-yard touchdown. It's like, okay, now I think are we going to find some consistency? I guess just I guess the best way to put this is the way Brett Venables coaches, you feel like offenses can never get comfortable. I guess what I'm trying to say is he never makes off. I guess his defenses are just, I don't know. I'm trying to the best way to articulate this. I feel offenses just never can get any consistency when they play against Brett Venables. I think that's why his defenses are always tough because there's a lot of unpredictability. He shows the different looks. He likes to blitz. If he finds that the blitz is working, he'll continue to do that. He's not afraid to just completely completely show a new look in any particular game. So, yeah, I guess Oklahoma, and then John Mateer at quarterback can make some plays. They got Deion Burks at receiver. Oklahoma always they have athletes. They got playmakers. So Oklahoma, I think, it's kind of like, who was the team last year that was kind of a tough, it's like I guess I could stick, I always like to use the Lions, for example. It's like a few years ago, the Lions didn't make the playoffs, but a lot of people thought like, man, the way they were playing down the stretch, that's a team no one wants to play. To me, Oklahoma, like not only are a legit national title contender, that's just like a team that's like, oh man, even if they have a low seed, like I forget who they projected to be matched up with at now, like I know it's a projection, but to me, like if Oklahoma, like if they come in at a low seed and I don't know, even if they played like Tulane, which they should win, like to me, like if you're Indiana, Ohio State, say hypothetically one of those teams gets the first round bye, like if you're Indiana, Ohio State and you're like, man, we got to play Oklahoma round 2, Granted, it would be Indiana, Ohio State would get them at home. That's like, man, we get a bye and we get to Oklahoma is playing us like that's yeah. Oklahoma, that's a tough out. So Oregon too, not out of it yet. It's interesting. Oregon, the heavy favorites against USC. That reminds me of a couple years ago when Oregon Oregon was heavy favorites against Washington in the Pac-12 championship, and people had forgotten, well, not forgotten, but a lot of people were like, "That's an interesting spread," because Washington had beat them in the regular season, and then Oregon's 9-point favorites. I'm not ready to predict right now that Oregon is going to win that game for sure, but I think I don't want to say people are sleeping on USC, but I think USC. It's interesting. People are still vouching for Texas, even though they have 3 losses and their schedule's tough. I think I think the reverse is kind of true for USC. I think even though their schedule is tough, but it's not as tough as Texas. People aren't really vouching, putting their foot down and really sticking up for USC. You look at USC; they lost to Illinois by a point on a game that was really kind of one of those games where it's like, okay, who has the ball last? That was really why they lost to Illinois. Then you look at USC; they lost to Notre Dame is really finding their footing. You know, look at Notre Dame has 2 losses to 2 good football teams, Miami and Texas A&M. So you look at USC and it's like, okay, their 2 losses were to Notre Dame, who's really good, and then Illinois on a game where it was really a case of, okay, which team has the football last? I mean, USC has the ingredients. Look, USC kind of reminds me of Michigan, similar record. USC kind of reminds me of, okay, we think they're good, but I think a lot of people would question, are they a good football team, just because it's like, okay, got a couple losses, schedule's tough, but it hasn't been like anything like crazy. But yeah, if you look at USC, in the way the Big Ten's kind of shaking out, you feel like USC has the head-to-head over Michigan. So I think it's interesting. Oregon, I think the way it stands with the Big Ten, USC and Oregon both do have a shot. Oregon would need some help. Oregon would need Ohio State to lose. USC needs Ohio State to lose. But yeah, USC would have that head-to-head in the scenario over Michigan. If Michigan hypothetically beat Ohio State, I think it's interesting how that works. I still have not. I'm sure someone's clarified how the Big Ten standings would go. But yeah, I think Indiana plays Purdue. I think Indiana has clinched, even with a loss to Purdue. But yeah, I do like USC a lot. I do like USC. I think is Wayman Jordan, the running back, I think is he done? But the King Miller, that freshman, looks good. He had a big game against Michigan. Makai Lemon, one of the best receivers in the country. That guy just, seems like he's just being productive, and it seems like he's getting 100 yards receiving in every other game. Their quarterback too, pretty good player. And I was talking with people about this. What's interesting about USC? I feel like they tend to shine better. USC tends to do better when they don't have a hyped up 5-star quarterback. In most cases, I know even if you go back to. Yeah, I know Matt Leinart, I forget what he was ranked exactly, but he was pretty highly recruited. It seems like USC tends to shine in recent years when they have an under the radar quarterback. I know is it Maiyava? Is that how you pronounce his name? I know he's starting to get more recognition. But for example, Sam Darnold became he worked his way into a top overall pick. But Sam Darnold was really under the radar guy. It seems like that was the last time. I use that example. That's the last time USC, won a conference title was with Sam Darnold, the under the radar quarterback. So yeah, it seems like USC kind of tends to thrive, and they do have kind of the under the radar quarterback, but they do have other things fixed on their team. It's nice to see with USC and Lincoln Riley made that point when they beat Michigan. It's like, okay, we do not want to be the team that's not, physical at the line of scrimmage. I think people talk about, well, Lincoln Riley, good coach, Pete Carroll at USC did a good job. What's the difference, between USC and Pete Carroll and Lincoln Riley, where under Lincoln Riley they're good, but they can't become a national title contender? Well, they got to get more physical at the line of scrimmage. I think Lincoln Riley's done a better job of that, but it's tough with him because that's really never been his identity as a coach. I think he's starting to understand that more now that he's in the Big Ten. But with Lincoln Riley, it's like he understood that's what they needed to do to beat Michigan, and they did a really nice job of that in that game. They're more physical at the line of scrimmage. But yeah, it's too bad they are a little bit inconsistent under Lincoln Riley as far as winning, losing, not playing well in all four phases of the game. But yeah, I like USC. I'm a believer in USC, and it'll be interesting to see. I guess I'm not counting them out. Yeah, I still think they're a good team, and they got a chance against Oregon as heavy underdogs to get a nice win there and get back in the mix for the Big Ten championship game and be a playoff team. Texas, too, I guess if we're being a little pessimistic in this episode, not as optimistic for Texas. I'm not as bought into Texas. What frustrates me is I'm trying to explain this the best way. Like, people used to be, especially with the 14 playoff, like wanting to eliminate teams who have multiple losses. And I used to be like that too. But then I've kind of shifted to okay, I do respect strength of schedule. I don't know why Texas is having to get an edge with 3 losses. I don't know why people are getting. I feel like Texas is getting more of the benefit of the doubt that they're a good team, even with 3 losses, just because of schedule stuff. You look at the Georgia game. I didn't watch that game, but if you look at the highlights, based on what I saw in the highlights, that game really was not competitive. I don't know. I think Texas is a decent team. I just am not. You look at last year, they got in, 2 losses to Georgia, really weren't competitive in either of those games, honestly. I mean, I guess you could argue they were competitive in the second half of the first game. In the SEC Championship, they were competitive at times. But you look at 2 losses, they were two-loss team last year, not really competitive in those losses. Texas is the same kind of a story this year. It's 3 losses, the 3 losses they had, not really competitive in any of them, even the Ohio State game, in the second half, they made it interesting. But that was one of those games where it's you see, if you didn't watch the game, and I know I watched highlights, I did see the extended highlights. If you didn't watch the game, you just saw the score of that game, you're like, 14-7. Yeah, pretty close. Probably pretty hard fought, low scoring, close game. It really was mostly 14-0. Ohio State really had control of that game. Now, Texas, Georgia, 2 good teams they lost to. Trying to remember Texas. What was Texas's 3rd loss? I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Oh, Florida. And then the Florida game too. You look at the score of that game. I think they ended up losing by a touchdown, but really Florida, their defensive line kind of dominated Texas's offensive line for a long time in that game. So you look at Texas's 3 losses, and you're like, okay, 35-10. Maybe Georgia kind of pulled away. Not really the case. Georgia was in control the whole time. 14-7 loss to Ohio State. You're like, okay, maybe it was a hard-fought, large-scoring game. Not really the case. It was 14-0 most of the game. Ohio State really controlled it. Texas got a late touchdown that kind of made it look respectable, if you will. And then same thing in the Florida game. It was mostly 29-14. What was it? 22-7. Florida was a couple scores in control most of the game. They really pressured Arch Manning. They made a couple plays late that made it interesting. So yeah, the 3 losses, not really competitive for Texas, and they're not really good. I guess it's kind of an oxymoron saying good losses, but there is but to back to my point with USC, if you're debating USC and Texas, USC, the loss to Illinois, it's okay, a loss, you could say a win's a win, a loss is a loss. I know USC lost to Illinois, But it was kind of like the case of like, okay, yeah, they lost, but it was kind of one of those games where it was back and forth. USC looked good. If you felt like if they had the ball back with like a minute left, you feel like if they had, the ball last, they would have won that game. So, yeah, USC to me, I guess to put it this way, Texas is ranked higher than USC currently. Even though they have 3 losses, USC has 2 losses. USC to me, the way they've played this season, based on who they've played, I guess I'll put it this way, USC's resume to me is more respectable than Texas's. But yeah. Yeah, SEC going to be interesting. Got several teams in the mix. Ole Miss still in the discussion. To me, Lane Kiffin, though, it's kind of same thing with Lincoln Riley. You feel like they don't. I feel like that's the best way to describe Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, Lincoln Riley, and USC. It feels like they lose at least, 2-3 games every year. And in those 2 or 3 losses, they didn't play well in one or 2 phases of the game. Like, for example, for a lot of times USC, they just play under Lincoln Riley, they play poorly on defense. To me, that's like, Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. Like what was the game they lost this year? Was it Georgia? But it feels like that's kind of the story with Lane Kiffin. They lose a game, they play really poor, like they can't stop the run, they play poorly on defense. So it feels like the same kind of story for Ole Miss. Like Ole Miss kind of in the similar boat as Indiana, Texas A&M. We need to, I guess the cliche, we need to see it to believe it. Like if Ole Miss wins the SEC championship, okay, that's the first step. Okay, now let's see them win a national title. So to really, I think Lane Kiffin winning a national title that's when people would stop putting Lane Kiffin in the category of like a, top 8 to 15 coach, top 5, maybe even top 5 to 10 range coach, and put him in the discussion of, okay, this guy can consistently put a program as a national title contender year in and year out, and this guy could consistently be a top 3-4 college football coach. I think, yeah, that's what Lane Kiffin is really trying to vouch for in this season. Obviously, he's still got a ways to go. They still have a lot of things to prove. I forget exactly who they end with. I think they do. I mean, I know Mississippi. I'm trying to remember who their final 2 games are. I think Mississippi State is who they end with. But yeah. Miami, too. I guess reiterate, that's a good team. Who all have we touched on? Texas Tech, I really haven't watched play. But yeah. Oregon, still a really good team. Just a tough loss to Indiana. But it could be the case of, if Oregon, if Indiana, if this is their year, they win the national title, we could look back on and say, man, Oregon was really good. They just happened to lose to a team that was just, the juggernaut, the team that was that much better. Kind of in the case of, I'm trying to think of an example, like kind of in the case, I guess, what would be a good example? Kind of like the year LSU won the national title in 19, Clemson, Clemson lost to LSU. I think a lot of people would say Clemson's still a really good team with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, they won a national title under him in 2018, but they got blown out by LSU because they just ran into, I heard one guy refer to it as juggernaut theory. They ran into a juggernaut. So, yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Michigan, Ohio State. You feel like Michigan does kind of have a weird edge in that game. I say a weird edge in that game. Just it feels like Michigan just seems, they seem more confident. They seem more loose in that game. So, but yeah. Yeah, the SEC is so tough this year. And it's funny, I was kind of calling the SEC a little overrated this year, but Yeah, they are. It's still a strong conference. Big Ten's still strong. Yeah, really looking forward to. Really want to emphasize. I think that Oregon USC game is so interesting. I think the fact that spread that Oregon's favored by 9 points. I think it was actually 9.5 points. It might be. I think it's when I checked this morning, it was 9 points. That is just so interesting to me because like I don't know. Like if USC wins that game, like is that like is USC like legitimately back in the discussion? I don't know. It just reminds me so much of Washington, Oregon a couple years ago. Like people were so. I think even in that first matchup, Oregon might have been favored. Like in the 23 season, the regular season, or when Washington won at Washington, and then they rematched in the Pac-12 championship, and then it was still like Oregon was still favored. It kind of reminds same thing. It's like Oregon's heavy favorites, but like USC, like we touched on, that's in my opinion they're a good football team. A lot of people don't know, but yeah, that'll be very interesting. Penn State, Penn State heavy favorites against Nebraska. I think, boy, at Penn State, yeah, that was I gotta really own up to. I predicted Penn State to win the national title. It was very, very far off on that prediction. What's interesting with Penn State's schedule turned out to be tougher than people thought because you looked at it, you're like Indiana, going into the season, you're like Indiana might be tough, but they should win. And then Oregon, you're like they got Oregon too, but it's at home. And then Ohio State, it's at Ohio State. Ohio State's had their number, but you feel like if Penn State's really taking the next step and that good of a team, they'll win. It's like now you're like, okay, Penn State's schedule was tougher than you thought. Maybe they weren't as good as or I guess turns out they weren't necessarily as good as we thought. But it's like Drew Aller, got hurt. James Franklin no longer the head coach. But you're like Penn State's schedule gets a little bit tough or a little bit easier now, finishing with Nebraska and then who is it, Rutgers, and you're like, okay, Penn State could finish the season, 6-6, and you're like, obviously a disappointment compared to the expectations heading into the season, but as opposed to a couple weeks ago when you're sitting at 3-6, winless in the conference, you're like, okay, 6-6, we were at least able to somewhat salvage this season, maybe play in a bowl game, maybe try to get some momentum going for next year. So Penn State, I guess the point I'm trying to get with, I know they have to win these next two games, but it's like they were sitting at a point where they were like, okay, the sky is really falling, and this season is just a complete mess. To now, you can get to you can see, I guess, there's the optimistic. There's some optimism as to okay, we could win on a 3-game winning streak, 6-6, win a bowl game, build some momentum next year for the coach coming in. Got some guys back. Maybe Drew Aller comes back. Still have a talented football team, even though you might lose Singleton and Katron Allen at running back. You still could try to continue to build some momentum heading into next season. But yeah, Texas A&M, so interesting to me. Marcel Reed, he's a guy that I guess I haven't really listened to a whole lot of college football talk, but he's a guy not getting a lot of buzz, and he's just a guy that he's one of those quarterbacks. I don't know. He reminds me of someone, and I'm not big into always making these player comparisons. I think each guy is kind of plays his own style. But to me, Marcel Reed kind of reminds me of or he's just a guy that not getting a lot of buzz, but he just goes out there, drops dimes, plays confident, just he's a guy that just what's that express? He just does what he needs to do to win the game. Like it's not like he's not just dropping back, picking people apart. It's not, he's not out there like Mahomes at Texas Tech or like Joe Burrow at LSU where he's just slinging around. They have games where it's 400 yards. It's just he's not he's not just like lighting teams up week in and week out, but you see he's throwing some dimes. That Texas A&M offense, it's running smoothly. They're moving the ball. They're not making turnovers. It's not sloppy exchanges like on handoffs and stuff. So yeah, Marcel Reed, he's a guy that just, he's getting it done, and he knows, to me, he looks like I don't know, I didn't follow him, in high school, but he looks like a guy that just seems like a winner. And some like who I'm trying to think, there's just been guys like that. Um, I can't think of. There's not any guy I think of in particular, but you've seen guys like that. They know how to win, even if they're like. I guess Tim Tebow. That's maybe not the best example, but that was kind of like Tebow. Well, I'd say Tebow in the NFL. There's times it wasn't pretty, but you're confident that this guy's just gonna find a way to make good things happen. That's Marcel Reed. That's Marcel Reed in Texas A&M, and it looks like Texas A&M. It's interesting. Jimbo Fisher didn't work out, but I think Texas A&M, Mike Elko, I think he was like kind of the perfect guy for Texas A&M when you think about it, because it's like he was like not a big name coach. Like Texas A&M has just been starving. Like it seems like they've just been fiending. They've been starving to get a big name head coach. They kind of got that with Jimbo Fisher, but it's like you go back like a long time ago. They tried to get Bo Schembechler, and Texas A&M, for whatever, like the timing just hasn't been right for them. They've been starving for like that home run hire. To me, maybe they're a program kind of like Michigan State under Mark D'Antonio years ago. To me, they're kind of like a program that just maybe a guy like Mike Elko, who's a good coach, but he wasn't. When they made the hire, it's like, okay, yeah, he had some success at Duke. Yeah, he's been in college football for a long time. Kind of was at A&M as a coordinator. Kind of bounced around as a coordinator. He's been okay, but maybe he was the perfect guy. It's like sometimes what's the expression? It's better to set the bar a little bit, maybe not like low, but set the bar down a notch and over deliver, as opposed to set the expectations set the bar high and underperform. Like under Jimbo Fisher, like I don't want to like be super negative with Jimbo Fisher, say he super underperformed, but Jimbo Fisher came in, the bars, Texas A&M pays Jimbo Fisher a lot of money. The bar's set way up here, right? At Florida State, it's top 5, it's top 3 recruiting classes. He wins a national title at Florida State. They're year in and year out conference contenders. The bar is set very high when Jimbo Fisher comes in. Texas A&M, bring in a guy like Mike Elko, a good coach. You're like, okay, bar's, set still high. It's still Texas A&M. It's still the SEC. It's still a Texas university. It's still a university in Texas. And you're like, okay, maybe we could be good. Maybe we'll be competitive. Maybe we'll be like Georgia under Mark Richt or Bo Pelini at Nebraska. Maybe we'll be a 9-3 program. Maybe that's what Texas A&M will just be for a long time. But it's like you set the tone at this point, Texas A&M, you could be like, okay, we could be a strong we could be a conference contender year in and year out, and then this year in 25 we have an opportunity to win a national title, and we could be a program that is a championship contender, and that the bar will be set high under Mike Elko. But yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to get at, USC, Oklahoma, 2 teams that I'm not sleeping on, that I'm still buying. And yeah, I think back to my point earlier, I think Oklahoma is going to be a really tough out in that whoever plays them in the playoff. Like I think it's hard to project how I mean, obviously this is still all hypothetical, it's all projection. But yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it. I guess not to toot my own horn, but like if Oklahoma doesn't get the bye, which most likely they won't if they make it in the playoff. Yeah, if you're Indiana, who are the 4 teams of the even if you're A&M, because do they have Georgia as the 4th team? Yeah, if you're Georgia, if you're A&M, if you're Ohio State, if you're Indiana, you're like, oh man, we got to play Oklahoma round 2. We get the pleasure, we get the luxury of sitting back, having a bye game. We get a home playoff game. We get to sit back and then, oh crap, we got Oklahoma is coming to town with Venables and that defense and the adjustments they can make. and they've already beat they beat Bama. They've played a tough schedule. They've had to play Michigan. They've had to play Texas. They've had to play Ole Miss. So Oklahoma, to me, yeah, like I'll reiterate, that's not going to be fun for whoever has to play them. So, all right, I'm going to wrap with that, guys. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Stay tuned for more episodes from the Brand Partial Show. And, stay tuned for more college football talk.